The morning sun filtered through the massive crystal dome of the Galactic Academy, casting rainbow patterns across the polished floors. Students from dozens of different worlds hurried through the corridors, their various forms creating a colorful parade of alien life. Some floated on tiny gravity fields, others clicked across the floor on multiple legs, and a few glided silently through the air on gossamer wings. Jake Morrison walked among them, his simple human form drawing little attention. After 3 months at the academy, most students had grown used to seeing the strange bipedal creature with the pale skin and brown hair. He was just another alien student. It's nothing more interesting than that. Jake carried his datapad under one arm and a small bag of supplies over his shoulder. Today was special. Today he would attend Professor Zelfik's famous lecture on dangerous predators. Every student talked about this class. It was the most popular course in the xenobiology department. And getting a seat required putting your name on a waiting list months in advance. The lecture hall was enormous, with curved rows of seats that could hold over 300 students. Jake found his assigned spot in the back row, far from the stage where the professor would speak. He did not mind sitting so far back. He had good eyesight, better than most humans actually, and he could hear perfectly well from anywhere in the room. Other students filed in around him, chattering excitedly in dozens of different languages. Universal translators built into their academy badges converted everything into standard galactic common. But Jake had learned to recognize some of the original sounds. Klaxons made clicking noises when they were excited. The Zephyrians hummed in harmony when they were happy. The Aquarians gurgled softly when they were nervous. Professor Zelfik entered the hall, and the room fell silent. The professor was an impressive figure, even by galactic standards. He stood nearly 8 feet tall on powerful legs, with smooth blue-green skin that glistened under the lights. His large eyes could see in multiple spectrums, and his webbed hands moved with precise grace as he prepared his equipment. Jake had attended several of the professor's classes before. Zelfik was brilliant, patient, and genuinely cared about teaching his students. He had a way of explaining complex ideas that made them easy to understand. He also had a reputation for being completely fearless when it came to studying dangerous creatures. Some said he had personally visited more deadly worlds than any other living scientist. The professor activated the main holographic display. A 3-dimensional image appeared above the stage. It showed a creature that made several students gasp in shock. The thing looked like a nightmare-given form. It had massive claws, teeth like daggers, and muscles that bulged under armor-like skin. Its eyes glowed red in the projection, and its mouth was frozen open in what looked like a roar of pure rage. Jake studied the image with interest. It looked somewhat like a bear he had seen during a camping trip in Alaska, except much larger and more aggressive. The proportions were different too, more upright and with longer arms. Professor Zelfik began to speak, his voice carrying easily through the hall's acoustic system. Each word was clear and precise, translated instantly for the benefit of students who came from nonverbal species. Welcome, students, to what many consider the most important lecture in our curriculum. Today we will discuss the apex predators of Class 12 Deathworlds. These are creatures so dangerous, so perfectly evolved for killing, that entire star systems have been declared off-limits to prevent their spread throughout the galaxy. A ripple of nervous energy passed through the audience. Some students shifted in their seats. Others activated recording devices to capture every word of the lecture. Jake pulled out his own notepad. It's an old-fashioned paper notebook that had belonged to his grandfather. Most students used electronic devices, but Jake preferred the feel of pen on paper. It reminded him of home, of sitting at the kitchen table while his father helped him with homework. The holographic display changed, showing a map of the galaxy with red zones marked in various sectors. There were more red zones than Jake had expected, scattered throughout known space like infected wounds. As you can see, the professor continued, we have identified 47 confirmed death worlds, each one home to predators that defy conventional understanding of biology and evolution. These worlds share certain characteristics. They have high gravity, extreme weather, dangerous radiation levels, and food chains dominated by creatures that would be considered impossible by normal evolutionary standards. Jake thought about Earth. His home planet had gravity that was considered normal by human standards. But he had learned that most inhabited worlds in the galaxy had much lighter gravity. He had also learned that Earth's weather was more extreme than most planets. The other students often complained about temperature changes of just a few degrees, while Jake remembered summer days in Texas that reached over 100 degrees, and winter nights in Minnesota that dropped to 40 below zero. The image changed again, this time showing the skeletal structure of one of the predators. Jake noticed that it looked remarkably similar to a human skeleton, just larger and heavier. The bone density readings displayed alongside the image showed numbers that seemed impossible. "Note the extraordinary bone density," Professor Zelthick explained. "These creatures possess skeletal structures that are nearly 3 times denser than what physics suggests should be possible for a mobile organism of this size. Yet somehow they move with speed and agility that surpasses most smaller creatures." Jake flexed his fingers unconsciously. He had broken his left arm twice playing football in high school, and both times the doctors had commented on how dense his bones were. They had said it was unusual for someone his age, and that it probably explained why the breaks had healed so quickly. A student in the front row raised her hand. Jake recognized her as Chitara, one of the Claxon students who was known for asking thoughtful questions. "Professor," she clicked in her musical voice, "how do these monsters survive on their own planets? If the conditions are so extreme, how do they find enough food to maintain such large bodies?" Professor Zelthick's expression grew more serious. "An excellent question, Chitara. The answer reveals perhaps the most disturbing aspect of these creatures. They are what we call omnivorous persistence hunters. They can eat virtually anything organic, and they will pursue prey across vast distances for days or even weeks until their target collapses from exhaustion." The room grew quieter. Could hear the soft humming of the environmental systems and the gentle breathing of hundreds of different species. He thought about his Uncle Pete, who had once told him stories about tracking wounded deer through the Montana wilderness. Pete could follow a trail for days, moving quietly through forest and over mountains until he found what he was looking for. Jake also thought about the marathon runners he had known in college. Some of them could run for hours without stopping, covering distances that seemed impossible to most people. He had read about ancient humans who could run down antelope on the African plains, chasing them until the animals died of exhaustion. The holographic display shifted to show the muscular system of one of the predators. The complexity was remarkable, with multiple layers of redundant muscle groups and what appeared to be backup systems for critical functions. "As you can see," the professor continued, "these creatures possess redundant muscular systems that allow them to continue functioning even when severely damaged. They also produce powerful chemical compounds that can block pain signals and increase strength during combat situations." Jake remembered the time he had dislocated his shoulder during a wrestling match in high school. The injury had been incredibly painful, but somehow he had managed to finish the match and even win it. The coach had said later that most people would have been unable to continue, but Jake had seemed to enter some kind of focused state where the pain did not affect him. He thought about stories he had heard from his grandfather, who had served in World War II. Grandpa Joe had told him about soldiers who had continued fighting even after being shot, driven by something deeper than normal human endurance. At the time, Jake had thought they were just war stories, but now he wondered if there was more truth to them than he had realized. The lecture continued, with Professor Zelthick describing the cardiovascular systems, digestive processes, and neural structures of the Deathworld predators. Each detail seemed more impossible than the last. Yet Jake found himself recognizing aspects of human physiology in every description as the first hour of the lecture drew to a close. Jake looked around at his fellow students. They all seemed fascinated but also frightened by what they were learning. Their various forms of expression showed concern, worry, and in some cases, genuine fear. Jake felt something different. He felt a strange sense of recognition, as if he was learning about distant cousins rather than alien monsters. The creatures Professor Zelthick described seemed less like nightmarish predators and more like highly evolved versions of things he had encountered throughout his life on Earth. 4. The first time since arriving at the Galactic Academy, Jake Morrison **. Professor Zelthick moved to the next section of his presentation, and the holographic display changed to show internal organ systems. The image was detailed and precise, showing cross-sections of what appeared to be the most efficient biological machine Jake had ever seen. Now we come to the internal structure of these remarkable predators, the professor announced. What you see here represents millions of years of evolution focused on one single purpose: survival at any cost. The heart system appeared first, a complex organ with multiple chambers and backup vessels. Jake noticed it looked very similar. Two diagrams he had seen in his high school biology classes, just more robust and with additional features. Notice the cardiovascular system, Professor Zelthick continued, pointing with a long webbed finger. This creature possesses not one, but two hearts. The primary heart handles normal circulation, while the secondary heart activates during times of extreme stress or injury. This allows the predator to continue fighting even when mortally wounded. Jake touched his chest unconsciously. He remembered the time he had been in a car accident during his senior year of high school. Paramedics had been amazed at how stable his vital signs were, despite the trauma. They had said his heart rate and blood pressure were remarkably steady for someone who had just been through such an experience. A Zephyrian student named Prism raised her crystalline hand. Professor, you mentioned that these creatures can function when mortally wounded. How is that possible? The professor smiled, showing rows of small, sharp teeth that were designed for eating fish and aquatic plants. Excellent question, Prism. The answer lies in what we call the adrenaline response system. The display changed to show the nervous system, taste, and glandular structures. Jake could see complex networks of chemical pathways and hormone production centers throughout the creature's body. When faced with extreme danger or when protecting their pack members, these predators release a cocktail of chemicals that would be lethal to most civilized species. These chemicals block pain signals, increase muscle strength by up to 300%, improve reaction times, and allow the creature to ignore injuries that would normally be incapacitating. Jake thought about the stories his father had told him about working on the family ranch. Dad had once been kicked by a horse and had broken 2 ribs, but he had continued working for the rest of the day because the cattle needed to be moved before a storm hit. He had not even gone to the hospital until the next morning. Jake also remembered his sister Lucy, who had walked 5 miles on a sprained ankle to get help. When their car had broken down in the middle of nowhere during a camping trip, she had said later that she had barely felt the pain while she was walking. It was only after she reached the ranger station that the injury began to hurt badly. The holographic display shifted to show the digestive system of the predator. It was incredibly efficient, with multiple stomach chambers and intestinal pathways that could process almost any organic material. The digestive capabilities of these creatures are perhaps their most impressive adaptation. Professor Zelthick explained. They can consume and extract nutrients from virtually any plant or animal matter. They can eat raw meat, digest bones, process toxic plants, and even consume materials that would poison other species. Jake remembered camping trips where he had eaten fish caught from mountain streams, wild berries found in the forest, and even insects when food supplies ran low. His friends from other planets at the academy were always amazed when he ate foods from the cafeteria that made them sick. The Klaxons could only eat certain types of processed nutrients. The Zephyrians survived entirely on mineral solutions. The Aquarians required foods that had been specially treated to remove toxins. A student in the middle section raised his hand. Jake recognized him as Buzz, one of the more nervous Klaxon students, who always sat near the front of the classroom. Professor? Buzz clicked anxiously. These creatures sound incredibly dangerous. How do they interact with their own species? Do they fight each other constantly? Professor Zelthick paused for a moment, and his expression became more thoughtful. That brings us to one of the most fascinating aspects of Deathworld predator: behavior. Despite their incredible capacity for violence, they demonstrate remarkable cooperation within their social groups. The display changed to show what appeared to be a family group of the predators. There were adults of different sizes and several smaller individuals that were obviously young. They were engaged in various activities. Some were preparing food. Others were caring for the young, and a few appeared to be teaching skills to the smaller ones. These creatures form complex social bonds that last their entire lives. They will sacrifice themselves without hesitation to protect members of their pack. They share resources, care for each other's offspring, and work together to solve problems that would be impossible for individuals to handle alone. Jake thought about his own family. Remembered the time his little cousin Danny had fallen through the ice on the farm pond during winter. Without thinking, Jake had jumped into the freezing water to pull him out. Had nearly gotten hypothermia. But it had never occurred to him not to go in after Danny. He thought about the volunteer fire department in his hometown, where neighbors would risk their lives to save each other's property. He thought about the search and rescue teams that would spend days looking for lost hikers in dangerous wilderness areas, never giving up even when the chances of survival seemed hopeless. The professor continued his explanation while the holographic display showed examples of the predators working together in various situations. They also demonstrate remarkable problem-solving abilities. When faced with new challenges, they can adapt their behavior and develop new strategies within a single generation. They pass knowledge from adults to young through direct teaching, which allows each generation to build on the experiences of those who came before. Jake remembered learning to hunt and fish from his grandfather. Grandpa Joe had taught him to read animal tracks, to move quietly through the forest, and to find water in the wilderness. These were skills that had been passed down through generations. Of his family, each person adding their own discoveries to the accumulated knowledge, the display changed again, showing the predators using tools. They were crafting weapons from natural materials, building shelters, and even creating simple machines to help with various tasks. Tool use among these creatures is remarkably sophisticated, Professor Zelthick continued. They can create weapons from available materials, construct complex shelters, and even develop basic technology when necessary. What makes this particularly impressive is that they can do this instinctively, without formal education or specialized training. Jake thought about the times he had fixed broken equipment on the ranch using whatever materials were available. He had once repaired a tractor engine using parts from an old washing machine and some wire he had found in the barn. His father had been amazed. But to Jake, it had just seemed like the obvious solution to the problem. A Zephyrian student named Crystal spoke up from near the front of the room. "Professor, if these creatures are so adaptable and intelligent, why haven't they developed space travel? Why are they still confined to their death worlds?" The professor's expression grew more serious. Jake noticed that several other faculty members who had been watching from the sides of the room leaned forward with interest. "That, Crystal, is one of the great mysteries we are still trying to solve. Our best theory is that these creatures are relatively recent additions to the galactic ecosystem. The oldest death world we have discovered shows signs of predator habitation dating back only about 200,000 years, which is virtually yesterday in galactic terms." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He knew from his anthropology classes that modern humans had appeared on Earth approximately 200,000 years ago. "We believe," the professor continued, "that these predators may have evolved rapidly in response to some catastrophic event on their worlds, which would explain their incredible adaptability and their focus on survival skills. They are still in what we might call an emergency evolution phase." The holographic display showed a timeline of galactic history, with markers indicating when various species had achieved space travel. Most had taken millions of years to develop the necessary technology and social structures. The Deathworld predators appeared on the timeline as a recent addition, with question marks indicating their unknown future development. "The concerning possibility," Professor Zelthick said quietly, "is that these creatures may eventually develop interstellar travel capabilities. If that happens, their expansion into the galaxy could be unstoppable. Species with their survival instincts, adaptability, and pack loyalty could potentially colonize any world they encountered." The room fell completely silent. Jake could hear his own heartbeat, which seemed unusually loud in the quiet hall. He thought about the human space program, about the International Space Station, the Mars colonies that were being planned, and the deep space exploration missions that were already being designed. He thought about human history, and how quickly his species had spread. Professor Zelthick moved to his control panel and activated a new series of images. The holographic display now showed groups of the predators engaged in what appeared to be coordinated activities. Some were hunting together, others were building structures, and several groups seemed to be engaged in complex communication. We now come to the behavioral patterns of these apex predators, the professor announced. What we have discovered challenges everything we thought we knew about predator species and their social development. Jake shifted in his seat, trying to ignore the growing sense of recognition that had been building throughout the lecture. The creatures on the display moved with a fluid coordination that reminded him of his high school football team during practice, or the way construction crews worked together. On his father's ranch, the first image showed a group of predators moving in formation across rough terrain. They spread out in a pattern that provided maximum coverage while maintaining visual contact with each other. Some carried tools. Others seemed to be tracking something, and a few appeared to be watching for dangers from different directions. Notice the hunting formation, Professor Zelthick explained. These creatures demonstrate what we call distributed intelligence. Each individual has a specific role, but they can adapt and change positions based on changing circumstances. This level of coordination requires communication skills that rival those of the most advanced civilized species. Jake thought about the search and rescue operation he had participated in during his junior year of college. A hiker had gone missing in the Rocky Mountains, and Jake had volunteered with the local sheriff's department to help find him. The search teams had moved through the wilderness in exactly the same pattern shown on the display, with each person covering a specific area while staying in contact with the others. A Claxon student named Chirp raised one of her forearms. Professor, how do these monsters communicate with each other? Do they have language? The professor touched his control panel, and the display changed to show close-up images of the predators' faces and hand movements. They possess multiple forms of communication. They use vocal sounds, facial expressions, body postures, and complex hand gestures. What makes this remarkable is that they can switch between communication methods depending on the situation. Jake watched the images with growing fascination. The hand gestures looked exactly like the sign language his deaf cousin Sarah used. The facial expressions were identical to ones he had seen thousands of times on human faces. Even the body postures matched the way people stood when they were alert, relaxed, angry, or afraid. They also demonstrate something we call silent coordination, the professor continued. They can work together effectively without making any sound at all. This suggests a level of mutual understanding that goes beyond simple communication. Jake remembered hunting trips with his father and uncle, where they had moved through the forest for hours without speaking, communicating only through slight hand movements and facial expressions. They had been able to coordinate their movements and share information about animal tracks, weather conditions, and potential dangers without ever making a sound that might alert their prey. The holographic display shifted to show the predators. In what appeared to be family groups, adults of different sizes were interacting with smaller individuals, clearly engaged in teaching activities. Some were demonstrating the use of tools, others were showing hunting techniques, and several were engaged in what looked like play activities. Perhaps most remarkably, Professor Zelthick said, these creatures invest enormous amounts of time and energy in training their young. The learning period for juvenile predators can last for 15 to 20 standard years, during which the adults provide constant instruction, protection, and support. Jake thought about his own childhood on the ranch in Montana. His father had spent countless hours teaching him to ride horses, repair equipment, read weather patterns, and handle livestock. His mother had taught him to cook, manage finances, and understand the complex social relationships that kept rural communities functioning. His grandfather had shared stories and skills that had been passed down through generations. The images changed to show adult predators engaged in what appeared to be rescue operations. They were working together to help injured members of their group, carrying them to safety, and providing care even when it put the rescuers in danger. These creatures demonstrate what we can only describe as altruistic behavior, the professor explained. They will risk their own lives to save members of their group. Even when the logical response would be to abandon the injured individual and preserve the safety of the majority. A Zephyrian student named Gleam spoke up from the middle section of the room. Professor, that doesn't make evolutionary sense. Predators should be focused on their own survival. Why would they endanger themselves for others? Professor Zelthick paused for a moment, his large eyes reflecting the light from the holographic display. That is one of the great puzzles we are still trying to solve, Gleam. This behavior contradicts everything we know about predator evolution. It suggests that these creatures operate according to principles that go beyond simple survival instincts. Jake thought about the stories he had heard throughout his life. Firefighters who ran into burning buildings to save strangers, police, officers who put themselves between criminals and innocent people, soldiers who threw themselves on grenades to protect their comrades, mountain climbers who risked their own lives to rescue people they had never met. The display changed again, showing the predators engaged in what appeared to be creative activities. Some were making art on cave walls. Others were crafting objects that seemed to have no practical purpose. And several groups were engaged in activities that looked like games or sports. Even more puzzling, the professor continued, these predators demonstrate behaviors that serve no survival purpose. They create art, engage in recreational activities, and spend time on pursuits that provide no obvious evolutionary advantage. This suggests a level of consciousness that we typically associate only with the most advanced, civilized species. Jake smiled despite his growing unease. He thought about the guitar he had learned to play in high school, the poetry he had written. In college, and the countless hours he had spent playing basketball with his friends, none of these activities had helped him survive. But they had been important parts of his life anyway. The holographic display now showed the predators in larger groups, what appeared to be multiple family units working together on major projects. They were building complex structures, organizing large-scale hunts, and engaging in activities that required coordination between dozens of individuals. The social structures of these creatures are remarkably sophisticated, Professor Zelthick explained. They can organize into groups of several hundred individuals, with complex hierarchies based on skill, experience, and mutual respect rather than simple dominance. They can make collective decisions, allocate resources fairly, and resolve conflicts without violence. Jake thought about his hometown in Montana, where everyone knew everyone else and people worked together to solve community problems. He thought about barn raisings, where entire neighborhoods would come together to help a family build new structures. He thought about town meetings where people would debate issues and reach decisions that everyone could accept. A nervous Aquarian student near the front of the room raised a tentacle. Professor Zelthick, if these creatures are so intelligent and cooperative, why do you classify them as dangerous predators? They sound more like a civilized species. Professor's expression grew grave, and Jake noticed that the faculty members, observing from the sides of the room, looked uncomfortable. That glob brings us to the most disturbing aspect of our research, the professor said quietly. These creatures possess all the characteristics of a highly advanced civilized species, but they have evolved in an environment that required them to maintain their predatory capabilities. They are, in essence, civilized predators. Fell silent except for the soft humming of the environmental systems. Jake could feel his heart beating faster as he waited for the professor to continue. What this means, Professor Zelthick continued, is that they combine the intellectual capabilities of advanced species with the survival instincts and physical abilities of apex predators. They can solve complex problems, work together effectively, and adapt to new situations, but they also possess the strength, endurance, and aggressive potential to be incredibly dangerous when threatened. The professor touched his control panel, and the display showed images of the predators in what appeared to be combat situations. They moved with deadly efficiency, using tools as weapons, coordinating attacks, and demonstrating tactical awareness that would rival any military force. When their family groups or territories are threatened, these creatures can transform from peaceful communities into devastating military units within moments. They fight with a combination of intelligence, coordination, and sheer ferocity that makes them nearly impossible to defeat. Professor Zelthick paused dramatically before activating the next section of his presentation. The holographic display went dark for a moment, and Jake could see the professor's reflection in the polished surface of the stage. The amphibians. Large eyes seemed to glow with excitement and concern as he prepared to reveal what was clearly the most important part of his research. What I am about to share with you, the professor announced, represents 30 years of investigation by the finest xenobiologists in the galaxy. It is a theory that challenges everything we thought we knew about natural evolution and the development of intelligent life. The display activated, showing a complex chart filled with genetic sequences, evolutionary timelines, and comparative data from dozens of different species. Jake squinted at the information, trying to understand the scientific notation and mathematical formulas that covered the projection. After extensive analysis of biological samples, environmental data, and behavioral observations from all 47 known Deathworlds, we have reached a startling conclusion, Professor Zelthick continued. These apex predators may not be the result of natural evolution at all. A ripple of surprise passed through the audience. Several students gasped. Others began whispering to their neighbors, and Jake noticed that the faculty members observing from the sides of the room leaned forward with intense interest. A Klaxon student named Tick raised her hand urgently. Professor, what do you mean they are not naturally evolved? How else could they have developed? Professor Zelthick touched his control panel, and the display changed to show what appeared to be a genetic comparison chart. Different colored lines represented various species, and Jake could see that one particular pattern stood out dramatically from all the others. The genetic evidence suggests artificial modification, the professor explained. The DNA structures of these predators show signs of deliberate engineering. Specific sequences appear to have been enhanced, combined, and optimized in ways that could not occur through random mutation and natural selection. Jake felt his mouth go dry. He thought about the Human Genome Project and the genetic research he had read about in college biology classes. He remembered learning that human DNA contained sequences that scientists did not fully understand. Sections that seemed unusually complex for a species that had supposedly evolved naturally on a single planet. The display shifted to show anatomical comparisons between the Deathworld predators and other known species. Jake could see that the predators possess combinations of features that appeared in different forms across multiple species, but were never found together naturally. Notice the hybrid characteristics. Professor Zelthick pointed to various parts of the anatomical diagrams. These creatures possess the endurance systems of marathon species, the strength capabilities of power predators, the intelligence levels of advanced civilizations, and the adaptability features of survival specialists. No single species should be able to combine all of these traits. Jake thought about human capabilities that had always seemed remarkable when he really considered them. Humans could run for hours like endurance animals, lift weights that were significant fractions of their body mass, solve complex problems that challenge the smartest species in the galaxy, and adapt to live in environments ranging from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforests to high mountain peaks. A Zephyrian student named Sparkle raised her crystalline hand. Professor, if these creatures were artificially created, who made them, and why? The professor's expression grew even more serious, and Jake noticed that several of the observing faculty members exchanged worried glances. That brings us to the most disturbing part of our hypothesis, Professor Zelthick said quietly. We believe these creatures were created as weapons during an ancient galactic war that occurred long before any of our current civilizations achieved space travel. The holographic display changed to show what appeared to be a timeline stretching back millions of years. Various points were marked with symbols indicating major galactic events. The rise and fall of different civilizations and periods of conflict. Between unknown powers, approximately 2 million years ago, there is evidence of a massive conflict that affected multiple star systems across this region of the galaxy. We have found remnants of advanced technology, signs of planetary bombardment, and genetic traces of species that no longer exist. Jake leaned forward in his seat, fascinated despite his growing unease. The professor was describing events that had occurred long before humans had even appeared on Earth, yet somehow he felt connected to this ancient history. We theorize that during this conflict, one or more of the warring civilizations created these apex predators as the ultimate soldiers. They were designed to be self-sufficient, adaptable, and capable of surviving on any world where they might be deployed. The display showed what appeared to be battle scenarios, with the predators fighting against various types of enemies in different environments. Jake could see that they were incredibly effective in combat, using their intelligence to develop tactics while relying on their physical capabilities to overwhelm opponents. The genetic modifications would have been extensive, the professor continued. Enhanced physical strength and endurance, improved healing capabilities, redundant organ systems, advanced problem-solving abilities, and most importantly, an unbreakable loyalty to their unit members. Jake thought about the bonds he had formed with his teammates in high school sports, his fellow students in college, and his family back home. There was something about human relationships that went deeper than simple friendship or cooperation. People would sacrifice everything for their families, communities, their countries, often without even thinking about the personal cost. A nervous Aquarian student near the front raised a tentacle. "Professor, if these creatures were created as weapons, what happened to their creators? Why are the predators still confined to their death worlds?" Professor Zelthick paused for a long moment before answering. "We believe the creators were destroyed in the same war that led to the creation of these weapons. The predators were left stranded on their deployment worlds, cut off from their support systems and forced to survive on their own." The display changed to show images of the death worlds themselves. Jake could see that they were harsh, dangerous places with extreme weather, hostile wildlife, and environmental conditions that would challenge any species. Yet somehow, the predators had not just survived, but thrived in these environments. Over millions of years, these weapon creatures adapted to their new circumstances. They developed their own cultures, their own social systems, and their own ways of life. But the fundamental programming remained. Survive at any cost, protect the group, adapt to any challenge. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He thought about human history and the way his species had spread across Earth, adapting to every environment and overcoming every obstacle. He thought about the wars, the explorations, the technological developments, and the relentless drive to expand into new territories. The professor moved to a new section of his presentation, and the display showed what appeared to be projection models and statistical analysis. "But here is where our hypothesis becomes truly concerning," Professor Zelthick said. "We believe these ancient weapons may be nearing the end of their isolation period. Recent observations suggest that several Deathworld species are beginning to develop technologies that could eventually lead to space travel." The room fell completely silent. Jake could hear his own heartbeat and the soft breathing of hundreds of different species around him. The implications of what the professor was suggesting were staggering. If these creatures achieve interstellar travel capabilities, they would likely resume their original programming. They would expand into the galaxy, establishing colonies on suitable worlds and defending their territory against any perceived threats. Jake thought about the human space program that was already underway on Earth, the International Space Station, the Mars exploration missions, the deep space probes that were being launched every year. Humans were already taking their first steps toward becoming a spacefaring species. A Claxon student named Buzz clicked anxiously. "Professor, surely they would not be hostile to peaceful civilizations. They have been isolated for so long, they might have developed different values." Professor Zelthick shook his head slowly. "Fortunately, the evidence suggests otherwise. The genetic programming for territorial expansion and threat response appears to be deeply embedded in their nature. They would likely view any other spacefaring species as potential competition or threats to their expansion." The display showed simulation models of what galactic expansion by the Deathworld predators might look like. Jake watched as red indicators spread across star maps, representing colonies and territorial claims that grew larger and more extensive with each generation. "Their advantages would be overwhelming," the professor continued. "They can survive in environments that would kill most civilized species. They can adapt to new challenges within a single generation. They work together with perfect coordination. And they have an unlimited willingness to use force when they believe it is necessary. Professor Zelthick moved to his final presentation screen, and Jake could see that this section was labeled as classified research. The professor looked around the room at the assembled students and faculty members before speaking. What I am about to show you represents the most recent and most concerning developments in our research, the professor announced. This information is being shared with you because we believe the galactic community needs to be prepared for what may be coming. The holographic display activated, showing detailed anatomical charts that were more precise and comprehensive than anything they had seen earlier in the lecture. Jake stared at the images and felt his breath catch in his throat. The creature being displayed looked exactly like a human being. Through advanced genetic analysis and biological modeling, we have been able to create a complete profile of what these Deathworld predators would look like, Professor Zelthick explained. The results are both fascinating and terrifying. Jake looked at the anatomical diagram and saw his own body reflected back at him. It's the height, the proportions, the bone structure, the muscle development. Even the brain-to-body ratio matched human physiology perfectly. The only difference was that the creature in the display was labeled as the most dangerous predator in known space. Note the distinctive characteristics, the professor continued, pointing to various features of the holographic figure. The bipedal stance that frees the upper limbs for tool use in combat. The forward-facing eyes of a predator species. The opposable thumbs that allow for complex manipulation of objects and weapons.
Ouch.
Jake looked down at his own hands, flexing his fingers and thumbs. Around the lecture hall, he could see other students examining their own appendages, which were very different from human hands. The Klaxons had multiple arms but no opposable digits. The Zephyrians had crystalline formations instead of fingers. The Aquarians had tentacles that could grip but could not manipulate objects with the same precision as human hands. The cranial structure is particularly interesting, Professor Zelthick continued. The prominent brow ridge protects the eyes during combat, while the large brain cavity indicates intelligence levels that rival or exceed those of the most advanced civilized species. Jake unconsciously touched his forehead, feeling the bone structure that the professor was describing. He had never thought of his brow ridge as protective armor, but now he could see how it would shield his eyes from impacts during physical confrontations. A Zephyrian student named Prism raised her hand. Professor, how would we recognize one of these creatures if we encountered it in person? What behavioral signs should we watch for? Professor Zelthick paused for a moment, and Jake noticed that several faculty members were looking directly at him. He tried to remain calm. He could feel sweat beginning to form on his forehead despite the comfortable temperature in the lecture hall. An excellent question, Prism. According to our behavioral analysis, these creatures would likely attempt to blend in with civilized populations. They are intelligent enough to understand the advantages of remaining undetected until they are ready to reveal their true nature. The display changed to show a list of behavioral characteristics that made Jake's heart race with recognition. They would demonstrate unusual physical capabilities, the professor read from the list. Superior endurance, faster healing, greater strength relative to their body size, and resistance to environmental conditions that would affect other species. Jake thought about his first weeks at the academy, when he had easily outperformed other students in physical activities without even trying. During the zero-gravity training exercises, he had been the only student who did not experience motion sickness. In the wilderness survival course, he had been comfortable in conditions that left other students struggling. They would show remarkable problem-solving abilities under pressure, the professor continued. These creatures can analyze complex situations quickly and develop effective solutions using available resources. Jake remembered the laboratory accident during his second month at the academy. When a chemical reaction had gone wrong and filled the room with toxic smoke, he had immediately organized an evacuation while other students panicked. He had used emergency equipment to create a safe breathing space and had carried 2 injured Klaxon students to safety. Most distinctively, Professor Zelthick said, they would remain calm in situations that would terrify normal beings. Their stress response systems are designed to improve performance rather than cause panic. Jake felt a cold realization washing over him. Every characteristic the professor described matched his own behavior perfectly. He had always been the one to stay calm during emergencies, to think clearly under pressure, to act decisively when others were paralyzed by fear. A Klaxon student named Chirp clicked nervously. "Professor, if one of these predators was hiding among us, how dangerous would it be?" The professor's expression grew grave. "That depends entirely on whether it perceived the surrounding population as a threat to itself or its pack members. If it felt safe and secure, it might remain peaceful indefinitely. But if it believed that it or those it cared about were in danger..." The professor did not finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Jake thought about the protective instincts he had always felt toward his family and friends. He remembered the rage he had experienced when bullies had threatened his younger sister, the fury that had consumed him when he saw someone hurting an animal, the cold anger that had filled him when he witnessed injustice. "The creature would also likely be gathering intelligence about our civilizations," Professor Zelthek continued. "Learning about our technologies, our social structures, our military capabilities, and our weaknesses. This information could eventually be used to plan an invasion or conquest." Jake realized that this was exactly what he had been doing, though not consciously. He had learned about galactic politics, studied the various species and their capabilities, and observed the military and security systems of the Academy. He had told himself it was just academic curiosity. But now he wondered if something deeper was driving his interest. The professor activated a new section of the display, showing what appeared to be surveillance footage from various locations around the galaxy. "We have reason to believe that these creatures may have already achieved limited space travel," Professor Zelthik announced. "There have been reports of unusual individuals appearing on several worlds, always claiming to be from remote or recently contacted planets." Jake felt his hands beginning to shake. The professor was describing exactly how humans had been introduced to the galactic community. Earth had been classified as a newly discovered world, and humans were supposedly a peaceful species that had just achieved basic space travel. "These individuals always appear to be harmless," the professor continued. "They integrate into local populations, pursue education or peaceful occupations, and show no signs of aggression. But our analysis suggests this may be part of a long-term infiltration strategy." The display showed images of several different individuals from various worlds. Jake stared at the screen and felt his world collapse around him. Every single image showed what appeared to be a human being, different ages, different genders, different ethnic backgrounds, but all unmistakably human. "We believe these may be advanced scouts," Professor Zelthik explained, "gathering information and establishing footholds before the main population arrives. The pattern is consistent across multiple star systems and suggests a coordinated effort." Jake thought about the other human exchange students he had heard about at academies throughout the galaxy. He had assumed they were part of the same cultural exchange program that had brought him here. But now he realized they might be something very different. A faculty member near the side of the room raised his hand. "Professor Zelthik, what is the Academy's position on this threat? What actions are being taken?" The professor looked directly at Jake for a moment before answering. "We are maintaining careful observation and continuing our research. There are. Hypothesis is correct. Direct confrontation would be extremely dangerous. These creatures are designed for combat and would likely respond to threats with overwhelming force." Jake felt trapped between the desire to run and the need to remain. Still, he could sense that several people in the room were watching him, though he could not be sure if they suspected anything or were simply interested in his reaction to the lecture. "The most important thing," Professor Zelthik concluded, "is that we remain vigilant and report any suspicious behavior or unusual individuals to the proper authorities. Early detection may be our only chance to prevent a catastrophic invasion." As the professor began to shut down his presentation equipment, Jake realized that his time at the Academy was over. Whether the other faculty members suspected him or not, he could not risk remaining here much longer. Every day he stayed increased the chance that someone would connect his presence to the professor's research. But as he sat in the back row of the lecture hall, Surrounded by dozens of alien students who had just learned to fear his species, Jake Morrison also realized something else. He was not just a human exchange student who asked to risk.